Welcome to Into the Words, a podcast from the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. Today in the cabin is our dear friend, Jane Yolen. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you for having me, George.
Oh, what a treat. So you and Heidi Stempel, your daughter, are here for Picture Book Boot Camp. Tell me a little bit about this. This is something you and Heidi started?
Yes, we both have done a lot of teaching of writing, and I taught children's literature at Smith College for 7 years. And the idea of sort of spreading the joy of writing and publishing and what it means has always meant a lot to both of us. And so at one point we decided, because I have a big house, and I had at that point 5 guest rooms, and then an attic that had a couple of beds in it as well, that it would be nice if we could teach, but teach in the house. So we didn't have to go anywhere. Now, Heidi's a great cook, so she was going to do the cooking, I was going to do the talking. And it worked for actually six sessions, I think, 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. But then the idea of cooking and not working with the students really was not what Heidi wanted to do. And she's a good cook, but she's not a chef. And we had somebody who did help her with the wash up, but that's a long and hard gig when it's not the one you really want. So we had both been to Highlights before it had all of the wonderful cabins, etc. But we also had been there individually and together for other things for years. When Boyd's Mills Press started was when I first came. I used to come to the illustrators party that had. I'm not an illustrator, but Kent let me come to the party, invited me to the party, and I always said yes. And my then husband and I would come too, and he, alas, has been dead 14 years. So when Heidi and I started coming together, it was like a new day for me, a new dawn for me. And we looked at carefully, both of us, because I taught a couple of times here in the beginning of some of the teaching, but before the barn had been put up. And I liked the setting. I loved the people, and the food was out of this world. And Heidi and I talked about it, and we decided that if we could figure out how to do it, and if it could be possible, we'd like to have our picture book boot camp here. Yeah. And we honestly, I don't think, knew how great it was going to be, because we already had, we thought, done a really good job. And the first one we did, we had 12 students, which was what we thought we could manage. This year we have 24, which it turns out we can manage. And what we always tried to do was to make a community of writers who supported one another, who were allies, who were not aggressive with one another, but worked together to listen to new manuscripts themselves in critique groups, as well as getting the critiques that we gave them. And it's been a magical 3 days, 3.5 days, where I've seen people take a manuscript that they came in with and turn it into what is ready for a book. Oh, wow. I've seen people, I take them for a walk. We do what we call my ideas walk, because I always think that if you can get outside and look around, you will come back in a half hour or an hour with at least 5 new ideas. And then we would talk about it. Somebody would say, oh, well, look at that. And I'd say, what do you see there? I see this. And we sort of sparked ideas back and forth, and then I would go, that's your book. Work on that one.
So, Jane, how do you get your ideas for the idea walk? Or how do you key that up for the writers?
Well, to begin with, it started with my husband. My husband was an outdoors person, grew up in the West Virginia mountains. He's actually the Pa in the character Pa in Owl Moon, taking my daughter Heidi, our daughter Heidi, out owling, and he would every once in a while come into where I was writing, and he would say, "You've been sitting there too long. Let's go gathering." And those became gathering days, when you went outside and you looked at birds and you looked at animals and you looked at flowers and plants and bushes and rivers. When you saw a lark, running up and flying up into the sky, or you saw ants crawling down at your feet, and you took those and say, what if that were a picture book? How would I go? Where would I go with that? So I was still working, but I was outside. I was having more than just looking inside my own head. And as I say, we call those gathering days, and sometimes we'd be gone all day. Sometimes we'd gone overnight. Sometimes with the children when they were little, sometimes all by ourselves when the children were grown and off to school. And I thought, if I can do that, I could teach other people to do that. So I always make as part of my teaching, whether it's just a one-day workshop or if it's one of the longer boot camps, to try to take people outside and say, let's just see what's there. And we'd look at, when I took them for the walk the other day here at Boyd's Mills, I was looking for things that stuck out. Now it's fall, so everything is sort of, it's as if all the flesh is off. We're seeing the bones. And so we were seeing things that we might not have seen if this were a summer workshop or a spring workshop, or even an early fall workshop. And so some things looked very alien. People were talking about some science fiction-y ideas. Some things looked very much like time to go and hibernate. So people were thinking about that sort of thing. We were looking at little berries and wondered, we found a place where someone, and it wasn't an animal, had put the core of an apple out on a fence post. And we were trying to think about, what if this was a child who did this on a regular basis, leaving presents for the animals. And so it went for about an hour. And there were 24 with me, and of that 24, at least 15, we counted, came back with an idea. And 2 of them that night wrote a first draft that they were able to read the next morning. And I always say, when you do that and you come back with 5 ideas, say, maybe 2 of them are dead on arrival. 2 of them are salvageable with a little bit of tender, loving care, and 1 comes fully fleshed. That's a lucky day. You don't expect to end up with a book, but you're sure going to try.
Well, and that was my question. How do you get from the list of ideas from an idea walk or a brainstorm to pick that one, to take it
I think
further?
you need to learn how to triage, just like the Army medics, when they go and they say, these are dead on arrival. These will try resurrecting them first. And if that doesn't work, I know I can do something with that other idea. So it takes practice. But nobody says that writing is instantaneous, especially with writing for children, because you are serving several masters at the same time. You want to make it so that a publisher or an editor is going to want it. But the ultimate reader is going to be the child. The child doesn't have money to buy the books, so you have to go through a bunch of gatekeepers before you can get to the one who the book is really for.
Yeah.
So you're trying, anytime you're writing, especially a young children's book, you're trying to figure out the size of the manuscript. If it's a picture book, we know about how many pages it's going to be. It's going to be 32 pages, but with mostly pictures, very little text. But the text has to tell a story that has the child or the child substitute. Peter Rabbit is substitute for a naughty child. That sort of thing. The child or the child substitute has to have agency in getting to the end. They can't just be dumped upon. They just can't be lifted up over the final gate. They have to lift themselves over the final gate and understand that they've gotten to the thing that they have been seeking. So that's something that you know when you're going into a picture book. And this was a picture book boot camp.
So I would think you have so many ideas. It's more of figuring out which one you're going to work on when. Do you have any set process of when you choose your idea and how far you take that before you put it aside for a while?
My actual method of writing is button chair. I get up in the morning, make a cup of tea, and I go sit down in front of the computer, and I write. Now, I mostly start with writing exercises. I write a poem a day. I have for that last 8 or 9 years. The last 6 or 7 years, I've sent them out to about 1,100 people who sign up for it. And what I find is that kind of oils the system. My husband and his family used to own a boxcar and John T. McGraw's old train car with its red plush seats, etc. And that was their getaway place on a lovely piece of West Virginia riverside. And they had a pump. They didn't have running water. It wasn't running water. You had to pump it up. And when I write those poems, it's like I'm pumping up that reservoir of story. And it starts to pour out. First it pours out as poems, and that keeps me lyrical. That keeps me thinking of the words and how they work together. And before I know it, I'm working on one of the either book ideas or a new idea that's just popped into my head, or a book that I'm supposed to have into an editor who has bought it the next day or 5 days or a month from then. So I have certain triggers, but it all starts with pumping the water and starting out my morning.
Just to get the writing started.
Just to get the writing started.
Oh, I love that. And you were talking to me earlier about this connection between lyricism and voice. And you mentioned that you have to, I think you said you have to get the voice before the lyricism follows, or is that vice versa?
I think that good writers have many voices, depending upon what the project is. It can be a child's voice, it can be a rabbit's voice, it can be the bad guy's voice, and you have to know the voice. I have to know the voice before I can start a book, but I also have to know other things. I don't never know the plot. I'm terrible at plot, but it turns out I have the kind of brain that always finds the plot eventually. But the lyricism is just, I've been writing poetry since I was a child, literally a child in first grade. I wrote my first poem. Wasn't very good, but I wrote it. But the more you write, the better you get. The more you write poetry, the better you get at being lyrical. You may not be a better poet, but I think you get the better you get at that particular voice, the voice of the poet. And so for me, the things come at the same time. And I start to write, but I'm already lyrical because I started with those poems.
So switch gears a little bit and talk to me about your critique group. I've heard tales, and I think it's amazing. So tell me just a little bit.
Well, right now, my critique group consists of me, Leslie Ann Newman, Corinne Demas, Patricia McLaughlin, Ellen Whitlinger, Ann Turner, Barbara Diamond Golden. There are, I think that's all. That should be 6 of us or 7 of us. Patty McLaughlin and I have been in it together for 45 years. The next one was Ann Turner, and she's been there about 30, 35 years. There have been people in and out, but the ones now have stayed for quite some time. And we all have different strengths. Ann Turner loves to do nonfiction, and she loves to write more religious things. She's a Catholic and very devout. Barbara Diamond Golden writes a lot of religious things. She's Jewish and very devout. Ellen Whitlinger has written some dynamite novels that have been published that have been very important, but she's now decided she's a playwright, and she's mostly writing plays. Leslie Ann Newman wrote Heather Has Two Mommies, and she has been always on the knife's edge of controversy. She wrote a magnificent book about the death of Matthew Shepard that is stunningly beautiful, all in poems. And Patty McLaughlin wrote Sarah Plain and Tall, and all these beautiful, beautiful books. And we try to meet once a week, but mostly I think if we get all of us there, it's probably only once a month that happens. And we sit and we read to each other. We read portions of something we've been writing to each other, and we critique. We go to one another's readings. It's sort of what we have is a microcosm of what we're trying to Heidi and I are trying to replicate in boot camp. Mm-hmm. We help one another. We're collegial. We're not adversarial. We always start any kind of critique with something you like about the piece, even if you didn't actually like it all the way through. You find something that you can praise, and then get down to the business of saying, this is what I think needs handling, needs working, needs another thought. And sometimes we'll say, I'm pretty happy with this, but I don't think I have the right voice, or I can't find it where I went wrong here. I need some help on that. Sometimes you identify it yourself and ask for help. And along the way, this group of writers, we must have 800, 900 books out.
Wow, yeah.
Of course, a lot of them are mine. But still, we're all publishing. We're all engaged in writing. We're all engaged as well in being good, supportive colleagues.
And I like that idea that even though you've been writing for years and you've published over 300 and some odd books.
Some of them are very odd.
You're still working closely with a critique group, and you're still testing and reading and having feedback and working out the process.
And sometimes we don't bring it to the group, but we bring it to one person in the group who we think might sit and read it and give us, feedback that may be even tougher. So, and I would say to somebody, if they're reading something from me, I said, I don't need the praise at the beginning. Just give it to me straight.
Tell me what I need to know.
Yeah.
So we were in early November in Northampton at Rich Michelson's gallery for the opening of his children's illustration exhibit.
Right.
And they gave an award to Lynn Oliver and Stephen Muser from SCBWI. And you spoke a little bit about your early days with SCBWI. Will you just tell that story? I thought it was so neat.
I'm actually the second person to ever join the group.
Number 2 of SCBWI.
Number 2. There were these two young people who both had come at the same time to an educational publisher and got that. Those are probably their first jobs or close to their first jobs. And they arrived more or less at the same time. And they had some writing credits, but they had nothing to do with children's books. Lynn was very involved in trying to make a career on the side in movies, and I'm not sure what Steve was doing, maybe the same. But they were told, you're going to be our children's book people. We need you to write like 5 children's books about this or that or the other in a few weeks. We're going to need it. Evidently, the educational publishers didn't know anything about publishing either. But Lynn and Steve thought, we don't really know anything. There was no real internet in those days. So they tried to look up and find some organization that they could join and learn from, and found they were in Los Angeles, and found there was none in Los Angeles, and there was none anywhere else that they could find. So they, being young and enterprising, they said to one another, let's start that group. And they put an ad in the paper. And the first answer they got was from Sue Alexander. Now, Sue Alexander had not published a children's book yet, but she had been working on them. And so she wanted to join the group so she could learn something. Mm-hmm. But she also went to a workshop that Uri Shulevitz and I were running in Colorado. Uri and I both had maybe 5 or 6 books each out at that point. He went on to win the Caldecott several times. And I went on to write a lot of books, as you said. But Sue was my student, and we just got along like a house on fire. And then she told me about this new organization. She didn't say that there were only 3 people in the organization. She said, new organization. She said, I've signed up. And I said, well, send me the information I'll sign up to. Because honestly, I was looking for just the same sort of thing. And so I signed up, not realizing at the time I was the second person to sign up. And they asked me if I would speak at their first dinner meeting in Los Angeles. Now, I lived in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, you'll have to get me there. So they got me there, and Sid Fleischman, who lived in Los Angeles, who was, I think, the 3rd person to join, and I were both to speak, because we were their big guns at that point. He had more books than I had at that point, but we were the only 2 who had actually published anything. So there were 70 people who showed up for this dinner. And at the dinner, which was bulked up by Sue's husband, Lynn Oliver's, I think, father and mother, and her soon-to-be fiancé, Alan Baker, and Steve's girlfriend was there, and they cobbled it together. And I think they may have had at that point maybe 10 or 12 people who were interested, who all brought their families as well. Mm-hmm. And Sid spoke. Sid was a great humorist, and everybody had a wonderful time. And then it was my turn to speak. Now, I've done a lot of speaking at that point, but I'm not a good one for a joke in the middle of, or at the beginning of, I can't remember jokes. My father, who had come, not my mother, but my father had come, and he said to me, you must start a speech with a joke. And I had spent much too much time trying to figure out a joke that I could tell. But I finally had to stop because I couldn't. Mm-hmm. They were either knock-knock jokes or they weren't. I mean, but you can't say, knock-knock, who's there? Children's book writer who? I have no idea. So I just started talking about my love of books from early on, and how I think that literacy begins at the cradle. And when I finished, no one smiled, no one clapped. They had cheered for and laughed at Sid's, and I'm going, I guess maybe I'll stick to writing children's books and forget about speeches forever. And I was about to step down from the platform when everybody stood up and applauded. And I was stunned that, first of all, that I had gone over okay, but more than that people got what I was saying and liked what I was saying and wanted to know more about that kind of thing, about the passion that goes into writing, the recognition that what we're doing is something important. Because I had been in publishing as an editor, first at an adult publishing company, and then as an editorial person in a place that made their own books, a packager. And then I was finally, at that point, working as an assistant editor at Knopf in the children's department. So I really had gotten where I wanted to be as an editor in the children's department, writing a few things on my own as well. And I looked down at these people who were standing up and applauding, besides our mothers and fathers and boyfriends and girlfriends. And I thought, these are my people. These are the people I want to spend the rest of my life around, who are working hard, finding out how to write for children, how to write the best books they can for children, how to teach other people to write for children. And it has made me a happy person. I love to write. I love to teach, and I love to meet other writers.
That passion of wanting to tell story to children, and then that community that's been built. It's so fun to hear you talk about the beginning of SCBWI, which is so well known now. And
well, we have like 25,000, 30,000 people now.
Yes. And all thinking about story for children. Right. And that's what part of what drives me and our group here at the Highlights Foundation is seeing groups coming in and thinking about how their story works for children and that pursuit of story.
And your family tradition goes back so much further than SCBWI does. And that was interesting to me. And when I was introduced to your dad, when they were starting Boyd's Mills Press, and I found it was like, these people are not exactly like all the publishers I'm working for. They have a different take to it. They come out of a different tradition of storytelling, but I can do that too. I like doing that. I like the tone of what they're doing. And it was a little bit like picking Gallant, I think.
Oh, that's funny. It is fun to think about, since my great-grandparents started Highlights Magazine here on this property, that for the last 75 years, people have been coming here with that creative idea of storytelling for children in their heart. And I always say to the guests, I hope you feel some of that magic that's been left by the others, and please leave a little of your own magic behind so that community continues to build.
Yeah, and it's true, it is here. It's here from the people who are driving the students back and forth. It's here from the people in the kitchen who come out and talk to us and who buy books too, and who are sending them to their families and carrying that word on. The people who are interning here, the people who are cleaning here, the people who are making the cabins here. You feel like you're at a cousin's reunion, actually, without the bad cousin.
Well, and we're so excited, Jane, to have you a part of this by now having a Jane Yolen cabin, which I believe the sign says Phoenix Farm Annex on it.
Right, that's my house in Massachusetts.
Heidi Stempel, your daughter, was here a number of weeks ago, sewing the valances, hanging some of the artwork, making sure some of your books were in the bookshelf. It's really been a treat. And so you had a reception, champagne toast with sparkling cider with your group, which was wonderful. And at the same time, we were grateful and thankful to be able to announce the Jane Yolen and Heidi Stempel Scholarship, which will be a part of the cottage, the scholarship, and helping writers with that passion pursue their own dreams of storytelling for children.
I think the handing on, once you have if you have made it in whatever way made it means to you, if you have gotten your dreams, made public your dreams, publication is simply, the root word is public, to make public. Therefore, if you make public your dreams, you are publishing, whether it's on paper or it's standing in a street corner telling people stories. I think you were obligated, in the old sense of the word of obligation, you were obligated to pass it on.
Yes. Well, thank you for passing along. Now, we can't end without a poem. And so I see you have in front of you a poem. If you would share with
Yes,
us
I think
this
we need to
poem.
say that Heidi furnished the
Heidi
poem. I
thought
wrote
this
the
was a
poem, but
fitting poem.
yes, so it's called Writers in a Group. Pick a name for writers in a group: herd, horde, heap, school, bevy, scold, deceit, pride, perhaps a murder like the crow. No, I choose exaltation, for like the lark, we rise up singing.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful podcast here with Into the Words at the Highlights Foundation. Thank you, Jane Yolen, for all you do to support the Highlights Foundation, but more importantly, for all you do to support that belief that children are the world's most important people.
And they are. Thank you, George.